They called it beauty, even when it drained the life out of women. Faces were painted until the skin beneath blistered. Waists were shaped until breath thinned. And smiles were stained by the quiet burn of poison. No one at court questioned why elegance always seemed to tremble. Tonight, you will walk beside them and see what their mirrors never told. So, before you feel comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Only if your heart truly wants to. If you do like it, leave a little comment letting me know what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights. Adjust the pillow to fit your head. Maybe turn on a fan to create a relaxing atmosphere. And let's begin this journey together tonight. If a woman in Tudor England wished to be seen as worthy, the first thing demanded of her was a body she did not naturally possess. The standards were quiet but merciless, repeated in paintings, whispered in court corridors, and enforced through the stares of those who believed beauty measured virtue. A high forehead, drained of expression, skin so pale it seemed untouched by blood, a face stripped of its eyebrows until it resembled a blank page waiting for judgment. These features became symbols of refinement, and women learned quickly that failure to embody them meant slipping into obscurity or suspicion. The court ideal looked gentle on the surface, but the violence hid beneath it. A high forehead was not simply preferred, it was required. A visible sign of intelligence and submission. Mothers pulled their daughters close, murmuring that beauty began where the hairline ended. It was a strange lesson, yet it endured, carving itself into the daily routines of countless women. A girl could wake to the sound of razors scraping skin thin. Believing the sting was part of becoming graceful, even the glow of royal portraits betrayed the truth. Those serene faces, with their long brows, pale cheeks, and unbroken foreheads, were not reflections of natural charm. They were instructions, quiet commands disguised as art. Women in the towns mimicked what they saw, not out of vanity but fear. If the queen appeared unearthly, then ordinary beauty seemed unfitting, even shameful. The body became an obstacle to remove, remake, and refine. Nature was the first opponent. The skin was the next battlefield. The ideal complexion demanded an impossible whiteness, the kind that erased years, sunlight, and dignity. It suggested purity, untouched innocence, even holiness. But for most women, the pale skin came not from privilege but from suffering. Darkness was considered coarse, a sign of labor and imperfection. So women hid their natural tones under layers of powder, wishing to become something fragile, something admired. The sight of chalk-white faces drifting through Tudor streets might appear ghostly to modern eyes. But in their time, it was a mark of discipline, proof that a woman understood her place. Thinness, ironically, was not the goal. Tudor beauty praised a form that was both restrained and full, an impossible contradiction. The waist needed to appear narrow, controlled, and obedient to lacing and fabric. But the rest of the figure, hips, chest, and arms, were expected to suggest prosperity, health, and fertility. A woman was meant to embody abundance without excess, softness without imprecision, delicacy without frailty. Maintaining this balance was not simply difficult, it was punishing. Meals were adjusted, breath was managed, movement was measured. Nothing about the body felt like her own. Inside homes across the kingdom, mothers quietly taught their daughters how to stand so their figures looked pleasing, how to tilt their heads to lengthen the forehead, how to press their lips together to create an illusion of control. Beauty was not an ornament. It was a survival skill. Marriages depended on it. Reputation depended on it. Even safety depended on it. For a woman who appeared less than proper, risked scrutiny at every turn. And yet, these standards carried a deeper cruelty. They were endlessly shifting. A single court trend could ripple outward, turning perfectly ordinary women into sudden failures. A new royal favourite could redefine everything within days. The expectations were not merely unrealistic, they were unstable. A woman could spend years shaping herself to one ideal, only to find that the world had abandoned it the moment she succeeded. Still, they complied. They rose before dawn to begin their rituals. Scraping, whitening, tightening, reshaping. It was not that they believed in beauty. Many did not. But they understood that society believed in it. And that belief held power. It determined marriages, friendships, safety, and status. In a world where women had so little control, their bodies became one of the few things they could offer, though at a price far higher than most understood. Some endured the transformation with quiet resignation. Others grew brittle beneath its weight, losing any sense of self that did not serve appearance. The masks they built were admired by strangers, but painful to maintain. Behind every pale forehead and carefully shaped figure was a woman learning how to disappear into the expectations that surrounded her. The cost of beauty was not only physical, but it also gnawed at identity, hollowing women until only their surfaces remained. One could walk into a Tudor gathering and see dozens of women moving like carefully formed statues, each one trained to smile softly, lower her gaze, and hide any sign of strain. But beneath the silk and powder lay bruises, burns, and exhaustion. This was the quiet truth of Tudor beauty. It was not a celebration of the female body, but a reshaping of it into something delicate, obedient, and nearly silent. The elegance praised in court was born from discipline, not comfort. The suffering was private, yet the expectation was public. And many women learned that admiration could cost far more than dignity. It could cost health, breath, even life. Their pursuit of refinement left marks deeper than anyone wished to admit. Something harsher waited behind the polished faces, pressing at the edges of ordinary life. And once you see what women did to their own skin to meet these demands, the illusion of Tudor beauty begins to unravel. A Tudor woman's forehead was never just a forehead. It was a declaration, a high, space, smooth as polished bone, signalled refinement long before a word was spoken. In portraits, it looked effortless, quiet, pale, untouched, but behind every elegant face was a ritual far more violent than any viewer imagined. The removal of eyebrows was not a choice of style, it was a requirement. Repeated until the skin forgot what it meant to be natural. The tools were simple, almost crude. A thin razor, sharpened until it shivered in the light. A smear of lime paste, strong enough to burn. A pair of heated tweezers, warmed over coals until the metal glowed faintly. These items waited on small wooden tables each morning, ready to strip a woman's face of the features she was born with. The process was slow, meticulous, and painful. A misaligned hand could cut deeper than intended. A teaspoon too much lime could blister the skin within minutes. Yet, to many women, the sting was not frightening. It was familiar. Mothers taught daughters how to sit still while the first hairs were scraped away. The motion was rhythmic, almost gentle from a distance. Though each stroke sliced along tender skin, the eyebrow line thinned, then disappeared. What remained was a patch of irritated flesh, already turning pink from the shock. Some women dabbed cold water on it. Others simply endured the heat radiating beneath the surface. It was all part of the morning. The lime paste was followed for those who wanted absolute smoothness. Applied with a small cloth, it burned immediately, biting into pores and loosening anything the razor had missed. Women learned to hold their breath, waiting for the moment they judged safe enough to wipe the paste away before it caused lasting damage. But the skin rarely escaped unmarked. Redness lingered. Itching grew. Days of irritation were expected, even welcomed, as proof of dedication. For those whose hair grew stubbornly, heated tweezers offered a harsher solution. The metal pinched and tore in one movement, leaving tiny wounds that oozed before sealing. Over time, the repeated damage scarred the follicles. The body, exhausted by the assault, stopped producing new hairs. Baldness of the brow was not a defect, it was an achievement, earned through persistence and pain. But infection was a constant threat. Without clean tools or medical knowledge, women pressed razors against skin that had not fully healed from the week before. A small cut could darken overnight, swelling with heat. Some woke unable to open one eye from the puffiness. Others developed sores that cracked under the weight of powder and paint. Still, they continued. A woman with visible eyebrows risked ridicule. Better to endure disease than to appear unfashionable. In gatherings, one could see the consequences hidden beneath layers of cosmetics. Smooth foreheads glowed unnaturally, stretched of all expression. The absence of eyebrows erased the natural frames of the face, leaving a kind of pale emptiness that Tudor society considered noble. But the women wearing those expressions knew what it cost. They could feel the tightness when they smiled too broadly. They could sense the thinning of their skin, the sensitivity to cold air, the sharp sting of sweat touching raw patches. Some whispered that the trend was absurd, a cruel invention of court life that spread too quickly to be questioned. Yet the pressure was immense. Beauty, once defined in portraits, became an unspoken law. To resist it was to stand out in the worst way. Women who kept their brows were seen as rustic, unserious, and uneducated. Their choices became symbols, and symbols were rarely forgiven. Even servants and lower-class women felt the pull of imitation. They could not afford luxurious gowns or elaborate jewels, but they could offer their bodies. Plucking one's eyebrows required no wealth, only endurance. Poorer women often copied the practice with makeshift tools, rusted blades, kitchen lime, fragments of metal heated over open fires. Their skin paid for it. Burns healed crookedly, cuts scarred. Some lost more than hair. They lost pieces of themselves to infections that spread without warning. In private, many regretted the ritual. They missed the shape their faces once held, the expressions eyebrows allowed. Surprise became muted. Sadness grew indistinguishable from calm. The face transformed into something distant, more mask than flesh. That transformation, however unnatural, became celebrated. Neighbours complimented each other's pale foreheads. Portrait painters exaggerated the effect until it looked divine. A woman without eyebrows was no longer merely following a trend. She was aligning herself with queens. Every scrape, every burn, every hour of discomfort was a step toward belonging. And so the razors stayed sharp. The lime jars remained open. The tweezers warmed in quiet rooms before dawn. Even women who feared the pain returned to it out of obligation, convinced that beauty demanded obedience. The truth lay beneath the powder: damaged skin, exhausted follicles, and the silent acceptance of harm disguised as elegance. The high forehead might have symbolized intelligence, purity, or gentle restraint, but the path to achieving it left marks that never fully faded. The smoothness admired by society came from wounds no one wished to see. A deeper cost waited beneath each morning ritual, tightening its grip with every stroke of the blade. And once the face was stripped of its natural lines, other transformations of the skin began to seem inevitable. The pursuit of pale, unmarred skin settled over Tudor life like a quiet command. A complexion untouched by sunlight did more than signal beauty. It suggested virtue, purity, even a kind of delicate superiority. Women learned early that the world judged their worth not by the strength of their character, but by the whiteness of their faces. And so, across kitchens, chambers, and courtly dressing rooms. Jars of white paste waited in the half-light, thick and still, holding a danger few wanted to acknowledge. Ceruse looked harmless at first glance. Smooth, silky, almost clean, made from vinegar and lead soaked together until the mixture softened into a paste. It promised transformation with a single stroke. Dipped fingers carried it toward the skin the way one might apply salvation. Women spread it across their cheeks, foreheads, and necks, watching their natural tones disappear under layers of cold white. The change was immediate. They became pale as porcelain, luminous in dim rooms, bright in candlelight. Admirers rarely asked what made the glow possible. The poison worked slowly, sinking past the thin barrier of powder and into the body beneath. The first signs were subtle: dryness around the mouth, a faint itch along the jawline. Many ignored it, convinced irritation was just part of maintaining elegance. As days passed, the skin began to crack. Small fissures formed under the weight of daily applications. Some women dabbed more ceruse into these wounds, believing it would hide the damage. Instead, the lead sank deeper, entering the bloodstream like a whisper of something irreversible. Those who used ceruse often woke feeling heavy, unable to shake the dull ache in their limbs. Their hands trembled at unpredictable moments. A strange metallic taste lingered on their tongues. These symptoms came quietly enough that no one blamed the paint. Illness was common, fatigue was even more so. But the sickness bred by ceruse moved with a different intent. It stripped the body from within while preserving the illusion of beauty on the surface. By the time the sores appeared, many women were already dependent on the powder. The skin blistered in patches, tender, bright red, sometimes leaking clear fluid. Washing them hurt, so most avoided water, layering yet another coat of ceruse over the wounds. The white paste filled the cracks, sealing infection underneath. The more damaged the skin became, the more necessary the paint seemed. The cycle was effortless, one breath leading into the next, until the real face vanished entirely beneath the white mask. Those who lived closer to the court suffered the worst. Ambition pressed heavily on them. Every audience with nobles required a flawless complexion. Every public appearance, a face bright enough to outshine rivals. They repainted themselves relentlessly, hiding scabs and peeling patches under freshly mixed paste. Even when their cheeks grew numb or their eyes throbbed from swelling, they continued. Stopping meant revealing the truth. And the truth looked nothing like the portraits they wished to resemble. Lead poisoning crept silently through them, shifting from the skin into their bones and organs. Thoughts dulled, hair thinned, memory broke into fragments. Some experienced sharp pains behind their eyes that spread through their skulls like spreading frost. Physicians misread the symptoms, suggesting weak humors or emotional imbalance. Few made the connection between sickness and beauty, because few wanted to ask whether elegance could kill. Still, the white glow remained admired. Women complimented each other's smoothness, never mentioning the yellowing teeth or trembling hands that accompanied it. They clung to the belief that suffering proved commitment, an unspoken oath, sealed not with words but with poison. Ceruse did not simply paint the skin. It rewrote the way women understood their bodies, turning harm into habit, habit into expectation. When a woman washed her face at night, if she dared to, she sometimes found pieces of herself left behind on the cloth, flecks of skin, faint traces of blood. The mirror revealed a face ravaged by the very substance she relied on to appear alive. Yet by morning, she would take up the jar again, dipping her fingers into the cold paste, smoothing it over the damage. It felt necessary. It felt inevitable. It felt like the only way to remain visible in a world that valued perfection over truth. The brightness admired in courts was nothing more than the sheen of slow decay, Beneath the polished surface, something darker tightened its hold with each application. Once the mask grew thicker, what women endured for the illusion of beauty only became more difficult to confront. Rouged cheeks were meant to suggest warmth, vitality, and youthful softness. Qualities Tudor society insisted a woman should display, even when her body told a different story. Yet the flush admired in portraits did not come from health. It came from a substance ground into fine red powder, a compound born of mercury and sulfur, bright enough to deceive the eye and toxic enough to dim the body beneath it. The powder rested in small wooden boxes, each carved with delicate patterns that masked the violence held inside. Women lifted the lids with practiced familiarity, dipping soft cloths or fingertips into the pigment before rubbing it across their skin. At first touch, the powder warmed the cheeks with a glow that seemed alive. But the heat came not from beauty, it came from irritation. The skin tried desperately to reject. To observers, the colour looked gentle, even charming. It softened the hollow lines carved by stress, brightened faces worn by sleepless nights or malnutrition, and suggested a vitality that reality could not supply. Women learned how to apply just enough to mimic natural warmth while hiding the swelling beneath. The mirror rewarded them with an illusion. And illusions, in Tudor life, often mattered more than truth. But the mercury seeped inward, day after day. The compound entered the body through microscopic cracks in the skin. It travelled quietly, carried by the bloodstream, drifting toward organs that never agreed to bear such weight. Women began noticing subtle changes long before they understood their source. A persistent tremor in the fingers when lifting a cup, a heaviness in the eyes at dawn, hair falling out in small clumps that collected silently near wash basins. At first, these symptoms were dismissed as cold air, poor diet, exhaustion from work, or worry. Illness was constant in Tudor homes. So few questioned its cause. But mercury poisoning had a signature. The tremors grew stronger, turning delicate hands unreliable. Vision blurred unexpectedly, leaving the world hazy for hours at a time. Hair thinned until the scalp began to show. A cruel irony in an age that prized thick, well-kept tresses. Instead of abandoning the rouge, many women turned to cosmetics even more fiercely. The more their health declined, the more urgently they painted their cheeks to conceal the signs. Pale skin could be admired, but pallor paired with trembling was another matter. Rouge became armour, thin, fragile armour that offered no protection but hid the evidence long enough for them to endure another day among neighbours, family, or rivals. Inside homes, small accidents became common. A cup slipping from a shaking hand, a needle dropped and cannot be retrieved without help. Steps are misjudged on uneven floors. Yet, shame kept women silent. Better to endure the trembling than admit weakness. Better to blame fatigue than confess to poisoning. And better to keep painting the cheeks than reveal the raw, irritated flesh beneath. For those seeking love or marriage, the pressure was even greater. A flushed face was considered inviting, gentle, and pleasing to the eye. Brides often used more mercury rouge than usual on their wedding days, believing it added vibrancy. No one mentioned that the same powder clouded the mind, slowed reaction, and left many women faint or dizzy before the night ended. In wealthier households, court ladies added another layer of complication. The competition for attention pushed them to use deeper pigments, reapplying throughout the day. Some pressed the powder into their skin so forcefully that abrasions opened, allowing mercury to enter faster and more aggressively. Physicians noticed the shaking hands and dimmed eyes in these circles, but explanations ranged from weak nerves to emotional strain. Few traced the symptoms back to the red dust coating their handkerchiefs. Despite the growing harm, the pursuit of colour continued. Tudor society valued appearances more than well-being, and women learned to prioritize the surface of their faces over the signals their bodies sent. As long as the cheeks looked warm, no one questioned the cold truth beneath, even when the powder caused severe irritation, peeling skin, painful redness, small wounds struggling to heal. Women pressed more pigment into place, hiding the rawness under a fresh stain. The skin darkened over time, but not with the healthy flush it once promised. Instead, the pigment muddied, mixing with damaged flesh into a color that hinted at suffering far more than delight. Still, they persisted, believing that without the rouge, their faces would seem lifeless. Mercury had a way of drawing women deeper into dependence. The poison weakened them, and the weakness made the rouge feel necessary. A pale, trembling face might provoke questions. A flushed one invited admiration, or at least indifference. And indifference, for many women, was safer than scrutiny. The glow admired by strangers disguised a body slowly losing its strength. Beneath the red warmth lay a quiet unraveling that few wanted to recognize. With every deeper stain pressed into the skin, what waited beyond the illusion became harder to escape. The Tudor smile carried a quiet deception. What looked vibrant and alluring in dim candlelight was often built from a pigment far older and far more dangerous than anyone wished to admit. Cinnabar, ground from mercury sulfide into a deep, intoxicating red, rested in small pots across England, waiting for the moment when a woman would lift it to her lips and let the transformation begin. To those watching, the color suggested warmth, confidence, even seduction. But behind that softness lived a poison capable of undoing a body from the inside outward. Women approached cinnabar with a kind of reverence. Its color was unlike anything produced by nature on the human face, richer than blood, sharper than berries, more brilliant than any flush. They dabbed it carefully onto the lips, smoothing the pigment until every trace of natural skin vanished beneath the lacquered red. In the mirror, the effect seemed almost miraculous. The mouth glowed, the teeth appeared whiter, expressions sharpened into something theatrical, something admired. But the lips absorbed more than color. The skin there was thin, far thinner than the cheeks or brow, and cinnabar sank through it with alarming ease. What began as a slight tingling soon turned to burning. Though many women accepted the sensation without hesitation, they mistook it for the feeling of beauty taking hold, a sign that the paint was working as it should. Only later did the real consequences emerge: swollen gums, small ulcers forming at the corners of the mouth, a metallic taste that clung to the back of the throat, because eating removed the pigment. Many women reapplied it again and again throughout the day. Every layer pressed the mercury deeper. Some found their lips splitting open in winter, the cracks filling painfully with powder that refused to stay on the surface. Others discovered dark lines forming along the gums, a silent warning that the poison had begun to travel beyond the mouth. In homes where mirrors were scarce, a woman might only learn the extent of the damage when a loved one looked at her strangely, or she felt a sudden, sharp sting while speaking. By then, the wounds were often too deep for rest to heal. The ulcers multiplied, turning conversations into whispers and meals into agony. But the pressure to appear beautiful did not ease, so women painted over the injuries, sealing infection beneath a fresh red coating that hid the truth from others, and from themselves. There were days when swallowing became difficult. The soft tissues inside the mouth throbbed with each movement, and some women woke to blood on their pillows. Even so, cinnabar remained a staple of Tudor adornment. Its brilliance overshadowed its harm, and society never questioned the cost. A woman with pale lips risked appearing ill, tired, or indifferent to elegance. Brightness mattered more than comfort, and pain could be dismissed as weakness, not warning. In wealthier circles, The pressure grew sharper. Court gatherings demanded perfection not only in clothing and posture, but in expression. A bare mouth looked unfinished, almost impolite. Ladies reapplied the pigment before every audience, smoothing over the growing wounds with the practiced calm of those accustomed to discomfort. The red line of the lips became a kind of mask, a boundary between the polished exterior and the suffering concealed beneath. Some women developed tremors from mercury exposure, small shakes that made applying the pigment difficult. They steadied their hands as best they could, brushing the colour on with the persistence of those who believed that beauty was a duty, not a pleasure. Their bodies deteriorated quietly. Fevers appeared without explanation. Fatigue lingered endlessly, and small infections in the mouth spread to the bloodstream with startling ease. The smile so admired in portraits masked a private collapse. Yet the ritual continued. A woman could lose her hair, weaken her vision, suffer breathlessness and aching joints, and still reach for the crimson pot each morning. It was easier to uphold the illusion than question why so many women shared the same symptoms. Illness was familiar, poison was not. Beauty asked for obedience, and obedience was often given more readily than self-preservation. The colour remained irresistible, even as the mouth bled, even as ulcers deepened, even as trembling hands lowered the brush for the 1000th time. Women believed in the promise of cinnabar. They needed its brightness to feel visible, desirable, alive. In a world that judged them by appearance long before character, the red on their lips felt like the last thing they owned, even as it consumed them piece by piece. The brilliance admired by others came from a pigment that unraveled the body in silence. Beneath the painted mouth, a steady corrosion pushed deeper each day. As the colour grew more vivid, what it concealed only edged closer to the surface. Beauty in Tudor, life demanded not only alteration but removal, stripping the face of anything considered coarse, wild, or unrefined. Among the features targeted most ruthlessly was the fine hair across the cheeks and neck, the soft trace of humanity that society insisted must disappear. Women reached for lime paste and caustic solutions with a familiarity that felt almost domestic, despite knowing that each application carried the threat of pain sharp enough to linger for days. The process began with preparation. Lime, ground to powder, was mixed with water until it formed a paste that hissed faintly when stirred, as though warning anyone who touched it. The mixture burned on contact, its strength varying with each batch. Some women used diluted versions, hoping to avoid the worst of the sting. Others applied it thickly, believing that beauty required boldness rather than caution. Whatever the method, the result was rarely gentle. A woman would spread the paste across her cheeks, Yav, and the tender curve beneath her chin, holding still as the burning intensified. The sensation was unlike the quick sting of a razor. It was slower, heavier, as if the skin were being dissolved one breath at a time. Many closed their eyes, while the heat crawled across their faces. Others gripped the fabric of their gowns, waiting for the moment when they judged the risk had grown too great to continue. Removing the paste did not bring relief. The skin beneath was flushed, voluble, and frighteningly sensitive. Even light touched it like fire. Yet the hair was gone, burned away at the root, leaving behind an unnatural smoothness that Tudor society praised as elegance. Women learned to accept the pain as part of the transformation, a quiet debt paid in private chambers each morning or evening. But chemical burns do not vanish easily. Red patches deepened into raw marks by the following day. Some developed small blisters that burst without warning. Others found the skin darkening unevenly, a mottled pattern hidden only when thick layers of powder were pressed on top. The paint concealed the injuries from onlookers, but beneath the surface, the wounds continued to throb. Repeated use of caustic solutions left long-term scars. Thin, pale lines, or sunken patches that women learned to cover with strategic strokes of pigment. A few grew accustomed to the smell of lime and damaged flesh, an odor that clung faintly to their skin even after washing. It became part of their routine, part of their mourning, part of the unspoken cost of belonging to the world they lived in. Some infections spread quietly, burns that were not cleaned properly, or tools handled with unwashed hands, allowed bacteria to settle in the damaged tissue. Small cuts became swollen ridges. Tender skin grew stiff and cracked. Yet few blamed the practice itself. They believed they had applied the paste too long, or too close to a wound, or with the wrong technique. The ritual was never questioned, only their execution of it. For poorer women, ingredients were cruder. They used harsher lime, mixed with water from unclean sources, or even scraped lye left over from soap making. These mixtures caused deeper burns, sometimes peeling away layers of skin in strips. They endured the injuries in silence, tightening shawls around their faces when the wind touched the raw skin too sharply. Despite the pain, the pressure to appear refined remained. A smooth face meant dignity. A damaged one meant nothing at all. In wealthier homes, the burns were hidden more skillfully, but no less present. Ladies of the court wore thick powder not simply to whiten their skin, but to mask the redness blooming beneath their cheeks. Beneath the shimmering surface of their faces lay wounds that had never fully healed, irritated anew with every fresh application. Some developed numb patches where nerves no longer responded. Others felt every pulse of their heartbeat echo painfully through their cheeks. Yet the illusion held. Observers saw only the polished exterior, a neck free of hair, a jawline smooth enough to catch the candlelight, a face that appeared untouched by hardship. They praised these women for their composure, unaware that beneath the cosmetics, the skin had begun its slow deterioration. The truth was simple. The more a woman tried to perfect her face, the more the flesh beneath it suffered. Every ritual promised beauty while delivering a quiet disintegration. What seemed elegant from a distance revealed its cruelty only when the paint was washed away. If it was washed away at all, the smoothness admired so readily was carved out by burns few would willingly witness. Beneath the carefully painted surface, the skin continued its silent collapse. Each attempt to erase the past only pushed the damage further, waiting for the moment it could no longer be hidden. The Tudor silhouette, praised for its narrow waist and sculpted form, was not created by nature, but forced into existence through layers of fabric and bone. Women stepped into their gowns each morning, knowing that what followed would be a quiet struggle against their own bodies. The corset, aufdrehid, unyielding, and carefully laced, offered the promise of elegance, but only through the slow reshaping of flesh and bone beneath it. Putting on a corset was never a simple act. It required assistance, patience, and a willingness to surrender breath. As the laces tightened, the ribs compressed inward, narrowing the torso with each pull. Some women learned to exhale as the strings were drawn, allowing the corset to close further than it should. Others held onto bedposts or the edge of a table, while someone behind them braced a knee against their back for leverage. The goal was not comfort, it was conformity. Once secured, the garment forced the body into a posture that appeared refined. Shoulders drawn back, waist pinched sharply, chest lifted. But this artificial grace carried an immediate cost. Breathing became shallow, and little more than quick gasps spread between spoken words. The lungs could not expand fully, leaving women lightheaded before the day had even begun. They learned to speak softly, not because it was ladylike, but because raising their voices drained what little air they had. Meals became delicate negotiations, with the stomach compressed beneath whalebone. Even modest food caused discomfort. Many women ate in small, hesitant bites, waiting for the pain to settle before swallowing the next. Indigestion was common, so was nausea. Some avoided food entirely during gatherings, choosing hunger over the humiliation of fainting in public. But fainting was still frequent. In court halls and crowded markets, women suddenly went pale, their vision blurring as their oxygen levels dropped. Some collapsed with little warning, their bodies unable to maintain consciousness under the pressure of tightly drawn laces. Servants rushed to loosen the corset. Though few dared do so in front of others, it risked revealing the shape beneath the gown. A breach of modesty and beauty at once. Inside the body, the consequences deepened over time. Organs shifted slowly into unnatural positions, pressed downward or sideways by persistent constriction. The stomach curved, the liver flattened slightly, the intestines folded into cramped arrangements that made digestion unpredictable. Women lived with these changes as though they were ordinary, accepting chronic discomfort with the same resignation they gave to cold winters and long labor. Ribs endured the worst of it. Bones designed to protect the lungs gradually bent inward, reshaped by years of pressure. In some women, the lower ribs curved so sharply that breathing without a corset later in life felt strange, even painful. The body adapted to confinement, mistaking restriction for structure. Despite the suffering, the corset remained a constant companion. Women admired the silhouette it created, even as it betrayed them. Friends complimented each other's tight lacing, unaware that beneath the shining fabric lay bruises forming along the ribs and waist. Mothers repeated the same instructions to their daughters, passing down not only garments but expectations to appear controlled, composed, and delicately restrained, no matter the cost. In private chambers, women attempted small adjustments, loosening a string, shifting a bone channel, massaging sore ribs. These moments of stolen relief were brief, for the gown had to be perfect again before they stepped outside. Any looseness invited criticism. Any deviation suggested carelessness. For poorer women who imitated the fashion with cheaper materials, the suffering intensified. Their corsets lacked craftsmanship, leading to uneven pressure points and sharper edges. Some developed abrasions along their hips and underarms. Others experienced deep bruising that lasted for weeks. But the desire to appear respectable overcame the warnings written across their skin. Every woman understood that the corset was both a burden and a requirement. It shaped how they breathed, moved, arted, and rested. It shaped how they were judged. In Tudor society, a natural waist was considered almost indecent. Too free, too uncontrolled, too honest. Constriction signaled discipline, humility, and elegance. And so, the tightening continued. By night, when the corset was finally removed, the marks left behind told the true story. Deep red impressions where the bones pressed hardest, raw patches where fabric rubbed throughout the day, a trembling relief as lungs inflated fully for the first time in hours. Yet by morning, the garment returned, waiting to reclaim the body it had tamed. The graceful silhouette admired from afar was built on breadths that never reached full depth. Beneath the smooth lines of the gown, the body bent itself into shapes it was never meant to hold. As the laces tightened again, what seemed like elegance revealed itself as a quiet dismantling of the woman within. Footwear in Tudor society carried expectations far heavier than their delicate shapes suggested. Shoes were made narrow, stiff, and unforgiving, crafted in forms that favored appearance over anatomy. Women were urged, quietly, insistently, to fit themselves into sizes smaller than their own feet, believing that a dainty step reflected refinement, gentleness, and noble restraint. Each day began with the negotiation of pain, a battle between flesh and leather that the leather always won. Slipping into these shoes required determination. The narrow toe box compressed the toes tightly together, forcing them into an arrangement that ignored the natural spread of bone and tendon. Heels, though not raised like later fashions, were rigid blocks that offered no give. Once the foot was inside, the edges of the shoe bit into the skin, carving early impressions that deepened as the hours wore on. The pain began as a pressure, sharp but manageable. It rarely stayed that way. With each step, the body adjusted to the confinement, ankles strained, twisting slightly inward. The arch bore more weight than intended, tightening until it pulsed. Women learned to walk with shorter strides, controlled and quiet, not out of grace, but necessity. Any attempt at a natural step sent a jolt through the foot, a reminder that elegance demanded discipline long after comfort had fled. By midday, blisters formed across the heels and toes, sometimes popping inside the shoe where the raw skin rubbed against rough stitching. Calluses developed in response, toughening the surface layer while masking deeper injuries. Many women ignored the signs, believing that a hardened foot was simply part of becoming respectable. The body adapted so they could continue, though each adaptation carried a hidden cost. Joint damage crept in gradually. The toes, forced into unnatural proximity, began to curve inward. Bunions formed, pushing the bone outward in painful angles. Some women woke to throbbing aches along their big toes, the first hint of arthritis settling into the joints. The pain did not announce itself loudly. It whispered through each motion, intensifying with cold weather or long hours of standing. Still, the pressure to appear refined outweighed the discomfort. Tudor society valued posture as much as attire. Small shoes altered the way a woman carried herself, pulling her weight forward and encouraging a soft, delicate sway. Observers saw this as grace. They praised women for their gentle steps, unaware that each movement was calculated to avoid aggravating the pain burning beneath the surface. The walk admired by men was not born of elegance. It was born of survival. Over time, the damage extended beyond the feet. The altered gait shifted weight unevenly across the body, straining knees, hips, and lower back. Some women developed chronic inflammation in their joints, a deep ache that spread upward like dampness slowly rising through stone. Standing for long periods became difficult, yet standing was expected at court, at church, and at gatherings. They endured the quiet agony with lowered eyes and tightened jaws, hiding discomfort beneath layers of etiquette. Poorer women imitated the trend with cheaper footwear, thicker, heavier, and less forgiving. Their suffering was often worse. Shoes made from coarse materials created harsher friction, tearing skin and crushing toes more severely. They walked on uneven village roads, each stone sending shockwaves through joints already weakened by cramped shoes. But the desire to appear proper, to elevate themselves, even subtly, kept them slipping their feet into garments never meant for comfort. In private, women removed their shoes with a mixture of relief and dread. The relief came first. The sudden release of pressure, the blood rushing back into numb toes, the faint tingling that hinted at temporary freedom. Then came the dread, the sight of bruised nails, swollen joints, and deep indentations carved along the sides of their feet. Some soaked their feet in warm water, watching the redness bloom further. Others rubbed oils into tender skin, knowing that by morning the cycle would begin again. A few women could no longer hide the consequences. Their gait grew uneven, their steps hesitant, bones shifted permanently, toes curling or crossing over one another. In severe cases, swelling never fully receded, leaving the foot misshapen. Even then, expectations did not soften. They were judged not for the suffering, but for failing to maintain the illusion of light-footed elegance. The truth was simple. The noble appearance admired in portraits required the quiet erosion of the body. A small shoe created a delicate step, but only by crushing the foot into submission. With every event attended, every corridor crossed, every slow walk down a market lane, women paid for beauty one step at a time. The graceful movements praised in public masked bones, slowly shifting beneath the skin. Beneath the controlled steps lived an ache that deepened with every passing day. With each tightening of the shoes, what they endured in silence only pressed closer to breaking. A Tudor woman's hair was never just hair. It was a mark of status, a virtue, and desirability. An emblem the world read long before it considered her words. But illness, harsh cosmetics, and the slow decay caused by lead and mercury left many women with thinning strands or widening patches of scalp they could not reveal. Instead of confronting the loss, society offered another illusion: wigs woven from human hair or animal fur, dense enough to hide every flaw, and heavy enough to reshape the way a woman carried her head. These wigs rested on wooden stands when not in use, shaped into elaborate forms that mimicked abundance. Some were curled, some braided, some towered taller than nature intended. They looked magnificent from a distance, thick, glossy, and carefully arranged. But the moment a woman lifted one into her hands, the weight told a different story. The mass of hair pulled downward like a stone, testing the strength of the neck even before it was placed against the scalp. Putting on a wig was an exercise in endurance. The interior lining, often made from coarse cloth or stiff leather, pressed firmly against the skin. Women pinned the wig tightly in place, anchoring it to the few strands of natural hair that remained. Some used wax or resin to keep it from slipping during long hours at court or church. Once secured, the wig became a second skull, hot, suffocating, and unyielding. The heat built quickly. Human hair trapped warmth, and animal fur trapped even more. Within minutes, perspiration gathered beneath the wig, soaking into the lining. The scalp swelled with moisture. Unable to breathe, itching followed, first as a nuisance, then as a constant presence that could not be relieved without disturbing the carefully arranged curls. Many women learned to ignore the discomfort. Their expressions trained into composure, even as their skin crawled. Where there is heat and moisture, other problems soon take root. The enclosed environment beneath the wig created a perfect habitat for fungal infections. Red patches formed along the hairline, spreading slowly across the scalp. The skin began to flake. Some areas turned soft and tender, others dry and cracked. Women scratched discreetly when they thought no one was looking, careful not to disrupt the wig or expose the irritated skin beneath. Lice thrived as well, hidden within the thick layers of hair. They multiplied rapidly, feeding on a scalp too damp and fragile to resist. Women felt the small, persistent crawling beneath the wig, but could do little to stop it. Removing the wig in public was unthinkable. Removing it in private only confirmed the extent of the infestation. Some used scented oils to mask the smell of sweat and infection, hoping the fragrance would distract from the truth, resting just above their brows. The weight of the wig also left its mark. Long hours of wear strained the muscles of the neck and shoulders, causing headaches that radiated upward in thudding waves. Some women experienced numbness at the base of their skulls, a quiet warning that nerves were being compressed. Yet the idea of appearing in public with thinning hair felt far more terrifying than the dull ache at the back of the head. Social pressure sharpened the burden. A woman with full, thick hair was admired. One without it risked whispers about illness, weakness, or moral failing. The wig became more than a cover. It became a shield, a way to control the narrative of her own body. But the shield harmed her just as surely as the cosmetics that caused the hair loss in the first place. In some homes, wigs were shared or borrowed among female relatives, spreading fungal infections and lice from one woman to another without anyone realizing the cause. In wealthier households, Servants cleaned and reset the wigs, though cleaning often meant brushing the surface rather than addressing the filth hidden in the lining. The inside of a wig could go untouched for months. Gathering sweat, oils, dead skin, and the beginnings of mold. Yet from the outside, everything looked perfect. Women walked through halls with cascading curls, hair shimmering under candlelight, every strand arranged to suggest health and abundance. Admirers saw only the beauty. They never imagined the damp heat beneath the carefully set waves, or the raw patches of skin hidden under powder, or the quiet panic each time a woman felt movement near her scalp. In private, when the wig was finally removed, the damage revealed itself starkly. The scalp emerged red, swollen, and tender to the touch. Stray hairs clung to the lining. The smell of trapped moisture and old oils filled the air. Some women cried softly while examining the new patches of hair loss, knowing the wig that concealed their shame was also worsening it. Still, the ritual continued the next morning. The wig was adjusted, pinned, and worn as though it were part of the body itself. In Tudor society, appearance meant survival, and survival often demanded sacrifice. No matter how much it burned, suffocated, or itched, the vision of abundant hair admired from afar rested upon a foundation of heat, infection, and decay. Beneath the polished curls lay a scalp slowly surrendering to the damage. Each time the wig was lifted into place, the quiet harm waiting beneath grew heavier. A bright smile in Tudor England carried a weight far beyond charm. White teeth suggested cleanliness, discipline, and refinement, qualities a woman was expected to project, even when her life allowed little room for any of them. Yet natural whiteness was rare in a world without proper dental care. And so women turned to something harsher than brushing: mixtures of strong vinegar, stale urine, or diluted acids poured directly onto the fragile surface of their teeth. The ritual began quietly. A woman would lean over a basin, holding a small cup filled with whatever solution she had prepared or purchased. Vinegar was common, sharp, biting, and easy to obtain. Urine, once fermented, created an even stronger bleaching effect. Its ammonia was capable of stripping stains quickly. Others sought more dangerous mixtures, crafted by apothecaries who claimed they could brighten a smile within days. None of these solutions was truly safe. But safety rarely mattered when beauty was at stake. She would tip the liquid into her mouth, letting it pool around her teeth. The first moments always stung. Acid seeped into every crevice, pricking the gums, slipping between the teeth like a thin blade. Women learned to hold the burn steady, counting slowly before spitting into the basin. Some repeated the process several times, watching the enamel dull slightly each round until it took on a pale, matte sheen that looked, from a distance, like whiteness. Results appeared quickly. Teeth looked brighter under candlelight, clean enough to pass for healthy. But the acid had already begun its quiet destruction. Enamel, once eroded, could not regenerate. With each treatment, the teeth weakened. First, subtly, then visibly. Edges chipped. Tiny cracks formed along the surface. Cold drinks sent sharp tingles through the jaw. Sweet foods ached against exposed dentin. Still, and women continued, convinced that maintaining the colour was worth a little pain. Gum irritation followed soon after. The acid stripped away protective tissues, leaving red, swollen ridges that bled easily when touched. Some women tasted blood every morning, dismissing it as a minor inconvenience. Others rubbed herbs along their gums to soothe the ache before returning to their whitening mixtures again that evening. They believed the damage could be managed. But the harm only grew deeper, spreading from the surface into the roots. Teeth became loose, not immediately, and not always noticeably. But over time, the steady erosion left them less anchored. A woman might bite into a piece of bread and feel a subtle shift, a faint wobble that startled her. Later, the tooth would move again, this time accompanied by a dull, throbbing pain. Some teeth darkened at the center, signaling decay that no amount of acid could hide. Others broke cleanly during meals, leaving jagged fragments in the mouth. Yet, even as their smiles deteriorated, many women refused to stop. A bright smile carried social value. It softened imperfections. It drew admiration. It suggested youth in a world where aging came quickly. Women layered powders onto their lips, arranged their hair carefully, and maintained their painted faces with precision. White teeth completed the illusion, even if the brightness lasted only until the next flare of pain. Those with wealth turned to stronger solutions and paid a greater price. Apothecaries mixed corrosive rinses that discolored the gums, burned the tongue, and left teeth so fragile they cracked under the slightest pressure. Servants used simpler mixtures but suffered equally. Vinegar thinned their enamel. Urine burned their gums. Some rinsed multiple times a day in hopes of achieving the whiteness depicted in portraits of queens. In homes where families shared the same whitening solution, children sometimes imitated their mothers, unaware of the danger. They held the liquid in their mouths too long, drawn in by the idea of appearing more elegant. The pain that followed taught them otherwise. But the damage was already done. The worst injuries developed out of sight. Roots infected, jawlines swelled, abscesses formed, creating pockets of pus that pressed painfully against the bone. Without antibiotics or understanding, these infections grew deadly. A tooth loss did not always end the suffering. It often marked the beginning of a deeper illness. Still, society praised the look. A bright Tudor smile gleamed across banquet halls, markets, and court gatherings. Men admired it. Women envied it. No one asked what it took to maintain, or why so many women chewed ginger or cloves simply to numb the throbbing beneath their polished exterior. Beauty never revealed its cost willingly. At night, when the candles dimmed and the whitening cups were set aside, women sometimes pressed their fingers against their teeth, testing how firmly they held. Some prayed for strength. Others simply accepted that tomorrow they would rinse again. Because the world noticed colour long before it noticed pain. The brightness of a Tudor smile concealed enamel worn dangerously thin. Beneath the pale surface, each rinse pulled the teeth closer to breaking. When the illusion finally slipped, what remained revealed far more than the face wished to share. Pale skin in Tudor England was more than an aesthetic preference. It was a declaration of status, a quiet signal that a woman's life did not belong to the fields or the sun. Fairness suggested wealth, softness, and delicacy. It marked her as untouched by labour and sheltered by privilege. And so women went to great lengths to protect their skin from the smallest trace of sunlight, guarding themselves as though daylight were a threat rather than a source of life. The practice began early. Young girls were taught to remain indoors during the brightest hours. Their games restricted to courtyards, shaded by high walls or narrow halls where sunlight rarely reached. Windows were draped with heavy fabrics, allowing only thin strips of greyish light to slip through. A girl who wandered too close to brightness might be pulled back gently, reminded that a single afternoon outdoors could undo months of careful restraint. When women left their homes, they shielded themselves even more intensely. They wrapped their heads and shoulders in layers of cloth, leaving only a small opening for their eyes. Some used hoods shaped to block the sun from above. Others wore veils stitched from fine linen that filtered the light until the world looked dull and muted. The wealthiest women owned masks made of animal skin, soft, pliable pieces that fit snugly against the face to block any direct exposure. The interiors smelled of oil and sweat, but they allowed the wearer to walk beneath the sky without fear of tanning. The air beneath these coverings grew warm quickly. Breath condensed against the mask. Heat pooled around the neck and cheeks. Still, women endured it quietly. The discomfort seemed minor compared to the horror of darkened skin. A fair complexion was too fragile, too valued, to risk even a moment of sunlight. But the cost of this avoidance unfolded slowly, in ways they could not see. Bodies deprived of sunlight lacked the strength that should have accumulated naturally. Bones weakened, losing density year after year until they became fragile enough to break under the weight of ordinary tasks. A fall that might have caused nothing more than a bruise became a fracture. A misstep could snap a wrist. Even lifting a heavy pot could injure the spine. These breaks healed poorly. Some women developed permanent stoops, their backs bending inward as the bones tried to compensate for their own softness. Muscles weakened as well. Without the stimulation of outdoor movement, the body grew sluggish. A short walk left the women winded. Climbing stairs required pauses. Servants noticed how often they needed to steady their mistresses, though they rarely spoke of it. A lady's fragility was seen as elegance, not decline. The effects were even more severe for young girls. A childhood without sunlight meant bones that never fully formed. Their legs bowed subtly inward. Their ankles turned easily. Some girls entered adulthood already brittle, carrying fractures that healed crookedly or never healed at all. Mothers saw this and still insisted their daughters stay inside, convinced that beauty demanded sacrifice long before strength. Sunlight deprivation also weakened the immune system. Women caught illnesses easily and recovered slowly. Winters were especially harsh. Without the vitality sunlight should have offered, the cold seeped deeper, lingering in joints and lungs. Some women never regained their full energy after an illness, drifting through life with a quiet fatigue mistaken for gentleness. Yet society admired this pale fragility. It was described as graceful, refined, even angelic. A woman who walked carefully, who tired quickly, who looked delicate enough to break. She fit the ideal perfectly. No one questioned why her movements seemed hesitant or why her bones cracked under minor strain. Suffering became part of the charm, hidden beneath veils and whispered praise. Inside their homes, women rarely spoke of the pain. They moved slowly along corridors, clutching railings or the arms of furniture. Some avoided bending or lifting entirely. The fractures that shaped their bodies remained secret, disguised by heavy dresses and controlled gestures. At gatherings, they wore their paleness proudly, unaware or unwilling to admit that the complexion they cherished was built on a foundation of thinning bones. Even in private moments, sunlight was treated with suspicion. Curtains stayed closed. Doors remained shut. Rooms were dim, lit by candles even at midday. Children grew up believing daylight itself was somehow coarse and unbecoming. They touched their mother's pale hands and heard repeated warnings about freckles, darkening skin, and the ruin of beauty. In a world that valued appearance over health, women learned to obey the demands placed upon them, even when those demands slowly hollowed their bodies. Their reflections in polished metal looked serene, but their bones told another story entirely. The paleness admired by society concealed a body quietly losing its strength. Behind closed curtains, each day passed with bones growing softer beneath untouched skin. With beauty tied to darkness, the price demanded far more than anyone wished to see. A luminous complexion was one of the most prized features in Tudor beauty. Women believed that skin that reflected candlelight softly, almost like polished stone, marked them as refined and well kept. To achieve this glow, they turned to oils and powders infused with metals, lead, tin, and other heavy substances ground into fine dust and mixed carefully into creams. These mixtures promised radiance. They delivered something far more insidious: The ritual appeared gentle from the outside. A woman sat before her small mirror, lighting a single candle so the flame could show her where shadows still lingered on her face. She dipped her fingers into a pot of metallic oil, lifted it slowly, and let it warm slightly in her palm. Then she spread it across her cheeks, her forehead, her chin, moving in slow, deliberate circles until every part of her skin shone with a muted gleam. To her eye, the transformation was immediate. Dullness vanished, imperfections blurred. The glow remained even after hours of movement, refusing to fade the way natural oils did. But beneath the sheen, the skin suffocated. The metallic particles settled into the pores, filling them completely. They trapped sweat, dirt, and natural oils beneath the surface. The skin began to swell in small places, first as faint bumps, then as painful cysts that throbbed each time she touched her face. These eruptions appeared quietly, often overnight, and lingered for weeks. Some women pressed them flat and covered them with powder, believing the problem was temporary. Others ignored them entirely, choosing beauty over relief. The oils also created a thin, unbroken layer that prevented the skin from breathing. Heat built beneath it. Moisture collected. The deeper layers of the skin weakened, too inflamed to protect themselves. Follicles became infected. Pimples turned into lesions. Even gentle fabrics brushing against the face caused bursts of pain. Yet the shine remained, and so the practice continued. In darker corners of Tudor homes, where mirrors were smaller and light was poor, women often lifted their hair to examine the edges of their faces. They saw redness creeping along the jawline. They felt tender, swelling beneath the skin. Some recognized the symptoms. They had seen similar marks on other women, though no one spoke openly about the cause. Still, they used the oils again the next day, and the day after that. Beauty in Tudor England was not a choice. It was an expectation. Over time, the damage moved deeper. Metallic compounds entered the bloodstream through cracked skin and inflamed follicles. The body's defenses weakened gradually, too slowly for women to understand what was happening. Minor illnesses lasted longer than before. Cuts healed poorly. A cold that once faded in days now clung for weeks. Some women grew tired easily, unable to stand for long periods without feeling faint. But exhaustion blended seamlessly into the rhythm of Tudor life, where labor and stress were constant companions. The immune system, weakened by the steady intrusion of heavy metals, began to falter. Women caught infections more readily, some from common household sources: dirty linens, poorly washed cups, or the crowded, airless rooms where families spent most of their time. Their bodies fought back sluggishly, as though weighed down by the very substances they had applied to their skin each morning. Even the scent of the oils betrayed the harm. When warmed by the body, the mixture produced a faint metallic smell, sharp, cold, and strangely sweet. Women masked it with herbs or floral perfumes, but the scent lingered. It settled into the collars of dresses, into pillowcases, into the air around them. Some husbands quietly associated the smell with sickness, others with a strange, artificial beauty they couldn't fully understand. Despite the consequences, the shine remained desirable. At gatherings, a woman's illuminated skin caught candlelight from across the room. Admirers noticed the glow long before they saw the swelling hidden beneath powder. Compliments reinforced the cycle. The brighter the skin, the more elegant she appeared. The more elegant she appeared, the more often she reached for her pot of metallic oil. In private moments, some women touched the raised bumps beneath their fingers and wondered whether beauty was meant to feel like this. But the question faded each time they looked into the mirror and saw the sheen glimmer back at them. Pain was temporary. Appearance was what endured. Or so they believed. The skin, however, remembered everything. It remembered the blocked pores, the persistent swelling, the infections building slowly inside. It remembered the exhaustion that crept into the body, disguised as mere tiredness. And it remembered how each application of oil made it slightly weaker, slightly more vulnerable than before. The glow, admired by many, hid pores sealed shut beneath a metallic veil. Beneath that shine, the skin strained against the weight it carried. Each added layer pushed the damage further, deepening quietly where no one wished to look. Warmth on the cheeks was considered a mark of vitality in Tudor beauty, a small sign that life still moved beneath the layers of pale powder that covered so many faces. Yet natural colour rarely survived the weight of cosmetics, nor the strict indoor lives that kept women out of the sun and away from any flush brought on by movement. To maintain the illusion of youth, women relied on methods that blurred the boundary between ornament and injury, turning their own skin into the canvas upon which pain was quietly painted. The first method was deceptively simple. A woman would sit before her mirror, tilt her head slightly, and bring her nails or fingertips to her cheeks. With practiced precision, she pinched until a faint heat began to rise beneath the surface. The pressure deepened. The skin protested, and soon a patch of red appeared, bright enough to resemble natural blood flow, but born entirely from force. The sting settled in quickly, but she swallowed the discomfort and studied the effect. If the colour seemed too faint, she repeated the gesture until the glow matched the look expected at court or among guests. Some women took the process further, believing a quick, sharp wound produced a more reliable redness. Small blades were kept in drawers or hung discreetly from ribbons tucked beneath clothing. These tools were thin, shaped for control, and dangerous even in steady hands. A woman would draw one gently across her cheek, barely breaking the skin, just enough for a bead of blood to rise. She then used her fingers to spread that drop along the cheekbone until it became a faint wash of colour. The scent of iron lingered for a moment, mixing with the powders and perfumes she applied next. Needles offered another method, heated over a candle flame until the metal glowed faintly before being tapped against the cheek. Each touch left a tiny welt, reddening instantly. Some preferred thorns taken from gardens, believing their natural origin made them safer, though the risk of infection remained just as high. The tools varied, but the goal never changed: to mimic the warmth of health even when the body itself grew tired, pale, or sick beneath the weight of Tudor expectations. Pain accompanied every technique, even after the powder concealed the damage. The skin continued to throb. Women grew accustomed to holding their faces carefully through dinners, visits, and ceremonies, avoiding wide smiles or sudden expressions that might pull at the tender marks beneath the cosmetics. At night, when they washed their faces, the redness became clearer: irritated skin, small cuts, forming scabs. Some pressed cloths soaked in cool water against their cheeks, hoping to soothe the swelling, though many applied powders again the next day, forcing the wounds to endure a second layer of pressure. The long-term effects surfaced slowly. Scars formed where cuts had been repeated too often. Tiny white marks appeared beneath the powder, only visible when the skin caught the light at certain angles. Over the years, these marks spread into subtle patterns across the cheeks, ridges, and depressions that made the surface uneven. Women simply added more powder, more rouge, more pressure, unaware that every attempt to hide the marks deepened them. Infections proved far more dangerous. A small wound improperly cleaned began to darken, warming at its edges. Some infections spread downward, causing the jaw to ache with every movement. Others climbed toward the eyes, swelling the skin until vision blurred. Fever followed in the worst cases. A slow, creeping heat that left a woman lying still in her bed, wondering whether beauty had truly been worth so much pain. But these moments remained private. No one at court wished to acknowledge the damage lying beneath the aesthetics they praised. Mothers taught their daughters the ritual long before the girls understood its consequences. A mother might pinch her own cheek, then gesture for her daughter to mimic the motion, explaining that liveliness was necessary, that people judged harshly any sign of dullness or fatigue. Little fingers pressed against soft skin, producing the first bruises of a lifetime, spent shaping the face not according to nature, but according to expectation. Servants witnessed these rituals and adopted them as well, though they lacked proper tools and often suffered harsher infections. Thorns, pins, or even rough splinters became instruments of imitation. Their cheeks bore the marks more visibly, but they shared the same belief as their mistresses. Colour meant desirability. Desirability meant safety, and safety was not something easily surrendered. Despite the injuries, the ritual endured because the results were immediate. A room lit by candlelight softened the redness into a glow that seemed effortless. No one asked what caused it. No one wanted to know. Compliments drifted through the air, reinforcing the cycle. A woman accepted the words graciously, all while feeling the sting beneath her powder like a secret she could never reveal. Suffering, in this world, became a silent companion. It shaped the gestures, the posture, the stillness of the Tudor face. It created beauty that lasted only as long as the evening, while the wounds it left behind stayed far longer. The colour admired in crowded halls was born from quiet injury beneath the surface. Beneath each rosy glow, the skin held the memory of every cut and sting. What seemed lively from afar rested on harm that deepened each time the ritual was repeated. Belief in natural brightness held a powerful grip on Tudor beauty, stronger sometimes than reason itself. Among the stranger practices that survived through households and passed quietly from mother to daughter, the use of fermented urine stood out not because it was rare, but because it was shockingly common. Women trusted the liquid as though it were a kind of humble miracle. An inexpensive, accessible cleanser said to strip dullness from the skin and leave behind a pale, glowing surface that no ordinary washing could achieve. The ritual took place in private, far from the eyes of guests or servants who might whisper too freely. A small ceramic bowl sat near a window for days, holding urine left to ferment until the sharp ammonia rose strongly from the surface. The scent was unmistakable, acidic, biting, and quick to fill the room. Yet women tolerated it with quiet determination, convinced that the harsher the smell, the more effective the cleansing. A cloth was dipped lightly into the liquid, absorbed just enough to dampen the fibers. Then, standing before a small mirror, a woman would run the cloth across her face, pressing it into the pores and along the creases of her skin. The immediate sensation was heat. The ammonia stung. The eyes watered. But the belief in transformation held her steady. If she endured the burn long enough, she imagined the impurities would loosen, the complexion would brighten, and whatever shadow dulled her features would lift. Fermented urine did indeed have strong cleansing properties, but it also carried bacteria, countless strains that thrived in its warm, stagnant environment. Once pressed against the skin, these microorganisms found their way into tiny, unseen openings, pores, small scratches, healing spots left from cosmetics or the pinching of the cheeks. Infection began quietly. The surface reddened, then warmed, then swelled. At first, women dismissed these symptoms as temporary irritation, an expected response to something so potent. But deeper problems soon followed. Inflamed skin tightened painfully when touched. Small bumps formed around the chin or jawline, growing hot beneath the fingertips. In some cases, the infection spreads in thin, branching lines, leaving the skin blotched and uneven. Women hid these marks beneath powder, even though powder worsened the irritation by trapping bacteria against the skin. Their reflection in the mirror became layered. Beauty crafted above, damage swelling below, each fighting for control of the face. Servantes, who often cleaned the bowls or washed the cloths, witnessed these reactions more clearly than their mistresses. Some whispered warnings, some kept silent, afraid of losing their positions. The practice persisted, not because women ignored the harm, but because harm did not outweigh the desire to appear flawless in a world where flawlessness shaped their value. As the infections grew more serious, fever crept into the body. Nights became restless. The skin pulsed with pain. Some women woke to find their cheeks warm enough to flush but too sore to touch. A few could no longer apply cosmetics at all. The powder clung unevenly to the swollen patches, exposing the truth they had tried so hard to hide. Yet even then, they often returned to the bowl a week later, hoping the next cleansing would restore what they imagined had been lost. The contradictions ran deep. Fermented urine promised purity, yet carried contamination. It was praised as natural, yet caused damage. Raw and unnatural. Women clung to the belief because it was familiar, because it cost nothing, and because stories of its effectiveness had woven through households for generations. A practice carried by tradition carries its own momentum, even when the body pays the price. The most fragile victims were young girls encouraged to follow their mother's routines. Their developing skin reacted fiercely, swelling quickly or breaking out in patches that took weeks to heal. But the lesson was repeated. Beauty required dedication. Dedication required discomfort. And discomfort, in Tudor life, was simply part of becoming a woman. Some women eventually abandoned the practice after suffering severe infections. Others learned to dilute the liquid, weakening the burn. But many continued unaltered, choosing immediate brightness over long-term health. Their skin bore the marks for years. Thin scars, uneven texture, a lingering sensitivity to heat or cold. Still, the mirror offered reassurance in the brief moments after washing, when the skin looked slightly brighter, slightly newer, even if the effect lasted only an hour. That fleeting glow was enough to keep the bowl filled. The brightness they sought shimmered only for moments before fading beneath swelling and fever. Beneath every cleansing lay the quiet spread of bacteria the skin could not resist. With every return to the bowl, the promise of purity slipped further from reach. Belief in living softness shaped some of the most unsettling practices in Tudor beauty, guiding women toward remedies that claimed to draw vitality directly from raw, unspoiled matter. Among these, the use of fresh meat and pigeon droppings stood out not merely for their strangeness, but for the quiet trust placed in them. These mixtures, made in kitchens or small chambers away from guests, were considered entirely reasonable treatments for pale, delicate skin, treatments meant to restore youth, even as they carried the scent of decay. The process began with preparation. A small slab of raw meat, often veal, sometimes chicken, was sliced thinly enough to drape softly across the face. Its surface glistened beneath candlelight, cool to the touch. Heavy with moisture, women believed the living juices of the flesh would transfer into their own skin, smoothing its texture and restoring freshness. The logic followed a simple path. Something young, something full of life, pressed against the face, could encourage youth where the body itself faltered. Pigeon droppings, on the other hand, were prized for their supposed lightening effect. Collected from coops, dried slightly, then mixed into a soft paste. They formed a mask that could be spread easily across the cheeks and forehead. The smell was sharp, earthy, and unmistakable. Still, many women bore it patiently, assured by the whispers of others who promised that this odd substance could refine the complexion more effectively than any expensive cream. Masks made from meat held their own discomforts. The coldness seeped quickly into the skin, followed by a damp heaviness that felt almost suffocating. Fluids from the meat, natural but filled with bacteria invisible to the eye, are pressed into open pores or small scratches created by earlier beauty rituals. Women sat silently as the flesh warmed against their faces, unaware of how quickly the boundary between skin and contamination blurred. Pigeon-dropping masks brought a different sensation. As the paste dried, it tightened across the face, pulling at the skin in small, insistent tugs. Some women enjoyed the feeling, believing the tightening meant the mask was working. But beneath the surface, irritation began. Red patches formed where the mixture clung too closely. Fine rashes appeared along the jawline or around the nose. When the paste was finally washed away, the skin sometimes emerged, blotched and tender. Reactions were often dismissed. A little redness was normal, women told themselves. A little itching simply meant the skin was renewing. They repeated these thoughts until the discomfort quieted for a moment, even though the underlying irritation grew stronger with every application. Beauty demanded patience, and Tudor society had taught them that endurance equaled virtue. The risks grew sharper with time. Raw meat carries bacteria capable of invading the smallest weaknesses in the skin. Once beneath the surface, these microbes spread with ease, creating pockets of inflammation that felt warm beneath the fingertips. Some women woke to find swollen patches along their cheeks or beneath their eyes, tender enough to interfere with sleep. The swelling was hidden beneath powder the next morning, but the infection lingered. Pigeon droppings, too, harbored organisms that the skin struggled to repel. When applied repeatedly, the mixture disrupted the natural balance of the face. Women found themselves battling persistent breakouts or strange texture changes, areas that felt rougher, almost grainy, beneath the touch. Some developed mild fevers without realizing the cause. Others experienced burning sensations that lasted long after the mask had been washed away. Despite these reactions, the rituals remained deeply rooted. Mothers passed them to daughters. Servants tried them when no one was watching. The belief persisted because the first moments after removing the mask often revealed a temporary brightness. Skin that looked slightly smoother or paler, softened by moisture, or coated by the residue of the mixture. That brief illusion was enough to convince women that the masks worked, even as their skin weakened beneath the long-term assault. The contrast between appearance and reality became most striking in social gatherings. In candlelit halls, women's faces glowed softly, the powder hiding the irritation below. Admirers saw only the refined result, never the raw meat or bird droppings pressed into the skin hours earlier. The illusion strengthened the ritual, making it even harder to question the cost. In private, however, the consequences remained visible. Women felt the tenderness beneath their fingertips when washing their faces. They noticed the rashes along their hairlines, the small lesions near the corners of their mouths. They saw the way their skin reacted more quickly to discomfort, more slowly to healing. But beauty carried its own quiet momentum once a practice began. It rarely stopped until the body could no longer tolerate it. The pale softness admired in public often rose from substances teeming with decay. Beneath each moment of temporary brightness lay a skin struggling to resist what it had been fed. What appeared gentle on the surface carried harm that deepened with every ritual repeated in silence. Fragrance held a power in Tudor society that reached far beyond scent. Ooh, a woman's perfume signaled refinement before she ever spoke, drifting ahead of her like a silent declaration of taste, status, and self-control. The most coveted mixtures used rare materials, ambergris from the sea, resinous amber, and other potent substances that apothecaries blended into oils or powdered sachets. These fragrances clung to the skin for hours, warm and heavy, creating an aura that followed a woman through halls, gatherings, and private rooms. But luxury came with a cost no one wished to acknowledge. The preparation of such perfumes was meticulous. Apothecaries heated amber or resin until it softened, then folded it into oils scented with herbs or petals. The resulting mixture was dense, lingering, and volatile. A single drop, warmed by the skin, could fill a room. Women applied the perfume to their wrists, their throats, the inside of their sleeves, small places where body heat intensified the aroma. They believed the scent shielded them from the harsher odors of Tudor life. Smoke, unwashed bodies, damp clothing, illness. Perfume became armor, invisible but powerful. Yet the moment the fragrance touched the air, something else happened. The compounds within these mixtures, especially ambergris, whose origin lay in the digestive tract of whales, released gases that irritated the lungs. The sweetness sharpened as it warmed, creating a thickness in the air that made breathing subtly more difficult. At first, women noticed nothing more than a slight flutter in the chest, a faint sense of lightness behind the eyes. They believed it was part of the perfume's charm, but repeated exposure told another story. In crowded halls, where dozens of women wore similarly strong scents, the air grew dense enough to dull the senses. Guests sometimes felt dizzy without knowing why. Servants working in close quarters wiped sweat from their brows as headaches crept across their temples. The perfumes were not inherently meant to harm, yet their potency was undeniable. With each breath drawn in, the lungs absorbed not only fragrance, but the toxins riding with it. Women who used these scents daily developed persistent coughs. Not deep, hacking coughs. Something softer, almost delicate, as though the body hesitated to reveal its struggle. Breathing felt slightly restricted in cold weather, slightly heavy in warmth. Nights were filled with shallow breaths that never seemed to reach full depth. Still, they applied the perfume again the next morning, allowing its sweetness to mask whatever discomfort lingered beneath the ribs. More troubling were the neurological effects. Some fragrances, especially those blended with crushed herbs or exotic resins, triggered faintness or trembling. Women described moments when the edges of their vision blurred, or when a sudden wave of weakness washed through their limbs. They blamed hunger, exhaustion, or tight corsets, anything but the perfume resting warmly along their throats. Others felt sudden mood shifts, brief flashes of anxiety or irritability, passing quickly but returning often enough to unsettle them. Ambergris, prized for its longevity, carried the strongest effects. When warmed by the skin, it released compounds that clung not only to clothing but also to the airways. Women inhaled these particles repeatedly, absorbing them gradually into their bloodstream. Some noticed their heartbeats quickening unpredictably. Others found themselves growing unusually tired after only a few hours of socializing. The perfume's persistence, once its greatest luxury, revealed itself as a quiet threat. Still, the scent was admired. A woman who smelled richly of amber or resin was seen as elegant, cultured, and desirable. Admirers leaned closer, unaware that doing so exposed them to the same fumes. Compliments flowed easily, refined, enchanting, memorable. No one asked why a woman's hands trembled slightly during conversation, or why her eyes seemed to lose focus for a moment when she turned her head. The perfume hid these signs as effectively as powder concealed sickness on the skin. Servants, tasked with cleaning garments, soaked in perfume, suffered the consequences even more directly. They breathed the fumes at close range, often in windowless rooms. Their headaches were stronger, their dizziness more frequent, but their complaints went unnoticed. Absorbed into the daily grind of labor where discomfort was expected, and health was rarely protected. In private chambers, Women sometimes removed their jewelry and gowns, sat before their mirrors, and noticed the pressure building subtly behind their eyes. They massaged their temples, breathed slowly, and assumed the feeling would pass. It usually did, until the next application revived it. Beauty in Tudor life often demanded sacrifice. Perfume was no exception. The sweetness admired by many drifted through the air with a weight few understood. Beneath that fragrance lingered a heaviness that pressed quietly against breath and thought. Each inhalation drew the body deeper into a danger wrapped so elegantly in scent. Powder was not merely makeup in Tudor life. It was a second skin, a fragile shell women relied on to maintain the illusion of smoothness, clarity, and refinement. Once set upon the face, it was expected to last as long as the day required. Through meals, through conversation, through the long stillness of court routines. Washing it off with clean water risked disturbing the polished surface. So many women chose instead to let the powder remain for days, sometimes longer, refreshing only the outer layer while allowing the older layers beneath to settle deeper into the pores. The practice seemed harmless at first. A light dusting of white powder softened harsh lines, hid blemishes, and gave the skin a pale, porcelain-like finish that met the beauty standards of the age. But as each new layer settled, the old ones clung stubbornly, mixing with sweat and the fine dust that drifted through Tudor homes. By nightfall, the skin beneath the powder felt warm and tight, pressed down by a mixture of cosmetics and whatever debris the day had carried. Women rarely touched their faces, except to reapply powder. They avoided water deliberately, believing it weakened the structure of the makeup, causing streaks or uneven patches. Instead, they dabbed more powder onto the surface, smoothing imperfections without realizing how much they trapped beneath. Over time, the layers thickened into a film that blurred the texture of the skin, flattening natural contours and hiding whatever irritation slowly formed underneath. Beneath this mask, pores struggled to breathe. Oil accumulated without escape. Sweat dried in place. Dust adhered to the sticky mixture of cosmetics and skin residue. What formed beneath the powder was not simply dirt, but a compressed collection of bacteria, oils, and dead skin. A landscape warm enough for inflammation to take hold. Women felt small bumps developing before they ever saw them. Tender spots that pulsed faintly when touched. Whiteheads emerged first. Bright pinpoints beneath the powder that refused to heal because the trapped debris had no path out. Blackheads followed, dotting the nose and chin with tiny marks that darkened as exposure to the air oxidized the buildup. Many women never noticed these changes. The powder softened the edges of every flaw, creating a false calm on the surface, even as the skin below grew increasingly chaotic. As irritation deepened, some areas of the face became swollen. A slight ache lingered beneath the cheekbones, or along the jawline, or near the temples. These sensations came and went, explained away as fatigue or tightness from other beauty rituals. No one imagined that the skin itself was fighting a constant battle against bacteria sealed beneath decorative layers. Weeks passed, and the accumulation thickened further. Removing it seemed impossible now. Water alone could not dissolve the layers, and scrubbing risked tearing the skin. Some women turned briefly to oils to soften the powder, but oils often worsened the issue, blending with the residue and creating a heavier, stickier coating. The cycle grew harder to escape the longer it continued. Servants noticed the smell first, a faint sourness near collars or along the inside of veils, born from the mix of sweat and sealed-in impurities. They said nothing, accustomed to silence, but their eyes lingered on the places where irritation peeked through the powder, like cracks in a painted mask. Women at court hid these blemishes with even more powder. Their faces grew paler, flatter, and less expressive. The cosmetics clung to folds of skin, gathering in faint lines near the mouth or eyes. When they smiled, The powder shifted slightly, revealing the dryness beneath. When they frowned, the surface trembled like a shell, too thin to hold its shape. Night brought no relief. The skin heated under the weight of makeup, left unwashed. Some women pressed cloths, dampened with rose water, to their cheeks. But the cloths rarely penetrated the deep layers of residue. Others simply ignored the discomfort and slept, hoping the morning light would make everything look less severe. Infections became nearly inevitable. Pockets of pus formed beneath the skin, pressing outward. The surface remained deceptively calm, but the underlying inflammation grew larger each day. Some women felt sharp, sudden pains when turning their heads. Others noticed swelling near their ears or along their jawlines. Quiet warnings that the trapped infection had begun to spread. None of this stopped the ritual. Beauty required constancy. Refinement required maintenance. The powder remained the outer symbol of control, even as the skin beneath surrendered to chaos. Women continued to apply layer after layer, smoothing them gently, never pausing long enough to consider what their reflections did not reveal. The pale surface admired by so many covered a face slowly suffocating beneath its own adornment. Beneath the quiet stillness lay pores choked with debris and infection, with every layer added to maintain the illusion. The skin beneath drifted deeper into turmoil. In Tudor England, beauty did not simply follow fashion, it followed power. When Elizabeth I stepped into public view with her unmistakably pale face, flawless yet rigid beneath thick layers of ceruse, she created a standard that countless women felt compelled to imitate. Her image, reproduced in portraits and retold in murmured admiration, carried a force that shaped the private routines of those who lived far from court, yet longed to borrow even a shadow of her authority. Ceruse was the cornerstone of that image. Heavy, white, and opaque, it transformed the skin into a smooth, luminous surface that concealed age, exhaustion, and illness. It also carried a poison every woman knew, yet chose to ignore. The mixture of vinegar and lead seeped slowly into the skin, working its way inward until the body itself began to weaken. Rumors circulated quietly, stories of headaches, trembling hands, thinning hair, and strange fevers. But none of it mattered in the face of admiration. If the Queen wore it daily, then the danger must have been exaggerated, or so women told themselves. Imitation began early in life. Young girls watched their mothers apply powder so thick it hid every blemish. The girls learned to mix their own small pots of ceruse, practicing with soft brushes until they could cover the face evenly, leaving only the faintest suggestion of natural colour. They learned to hold still as the mixture tightened across their skin like a cold mask. They learned to inhale carefully, avoiding the metallic scent rising from the powder. Women who lived far from court relied on portrait descriptions and second-hand accounts. They imagined the Queen's face as something near divine, untouched, ethereal, a surface upon which no flaw could be allowed to live. To look anything less refined felt like a personal failure, and so they used ceruse long after their skin began to blister or peel. Ignoring every warning their bodies issued, some persisted even as illness grew visible. Red patches appeared beneath the powder, swelling quietly along the jawline. The skin cracked near the corners of the mouth, bleeding in thin, bright lines before being covered again by fresh layers. Women who experienced dizziness or faintness during long days blamed hunger or exhaustion. It was easier to accept a mundane explanation than to admit that the very substance they used to appear strong was weakening them from within. Servants saw the changes more clearly than anyone. They washed the clothes stained by powder. They collected fallen hair from combs and pillows. They noticed how the women they served moved more slowly each season, how the brightness in their eyes dulled beneath the weight of applied perfection. Still, silence was expected, especially when the inspiration for these rituals sat upon the throne. Even at gatherings, where the air shimmered with candlelight. The effects of ceruse became visible in ways no one dared mention. Powder cracked subtly when a woman smiled. White dust clung to the edges of cups and linens. When perspiration rose beneath the heavy makeup, streaks formed, fine lines cutting through the pale mask like fractures in porcelain. These marks were quickly smoothed or concealed, but witnesses remembered them even as the women pretended nothing had happened. The deeper consequences revealed themselves only in private. Skin grew thin, almost waxy, unable to heal from even minor blemishes. Women noticed bruises where none should have formed, as though the skin had lost its strength. Some felt persistent pain beneath their cheeks or along their temples. Others woke with trembling hands that steadied only after hours of rest. Yet the routine never changed. Ceruse remained a requirement, an emblem of discipline and loyalty to a beauty that offered no mercy. The belief in powerful beauty shaped everything. Women convinced themselves that endurance proved worthiness. Pain became a measure of commitment. Those who abandoned ceruse risked social judgment, whispers that they lacked refinement or fortitude. Those who continued earned admiration, even envy, from onlookers who saw only the surface, never the struggle hidden beneath. Many understood the danger, but understanding did not loosen the hold of desire. The Queen's example, her radiant whiteness, her pose, her near-legendary presence, overrode caution. Women chose admiration over well-being, convinced that beauty meant influence, and influence meant survival in a society that gave them few other tools. By the time their bodies signaled deeper harm, fainting spells, constant fatigue, and unexplained pains, it was often too late to reverse the damage. The mirror still showed beauty, but the skin beneath the powder told a different story. One etched in exhaustion and slow decline. The elegance they chased rested upon a mask that grew heavier with every application. Beneath that pale surface, strength slipped away bit by bit. What looked like power to the world concealed a body, quietly surrendering beneath its own adornment. Necklaces in Tudor life did more than adorn the body, they concealed it. Beneath the intricate chains, velvet bands, and stiff collars lay a quiet world of damage that few outside the household ever witnessed. The chemicals used in beauty rituals, ceruse, mercury mixtures, and harsh depilatories scarred the skin at the throat long before the face revealed any sign of distress. And so women wrapped their necks in tight ornaments, not to display wealth, but to hide what beauty had taken from them. The collar was often chosen before the gown. Women examined their reflections, studying where redness had spread overnight, where patches of missing hair made the skin appear uneven, or where the burn of a depilatory had left a faint but unmistakable mark. The necklace became a solution before a question could even form. A velvet band softened the transition between jaw and shoulder. A jeweled chain created a distraction. A lace collar shifted attention upward, drawing the eye toward the face and away from the skin beneath. Once fastened, the necklace pressed firmly against the throat. Velvet seemed soft at first touch, but once tied, it clung tightly, allowing little give with movement. Metal chains, especially heavier ones, dragged downward, where the weight rubbed against the skin each time a woman turned her head. Some collars felt stiff, shaped by wire or bone to maintain a specific silhouette, forcing the wearer to hold her neck in a controlled posture. None of these pieces was designed with comfort in mind. The priority was always coverage. Warmth built quickly beneath the fabric or metal. The skin at the neck, already sensitive from chemical exposure, reacted sharply to friction. Redness deepened. Irritation flared in small clusters. Women felt the itch rise beneath the band, but kept their expressions still, unwilling to touch the area or call attention to the pain. They had learned long ago that discomfort was a private matter, to be endured quietly, while the world admired their composure. Over time, The rubbing became constant. Each nod, each turn of the head created a small abrasion. These abrasions did not heal easily. Powders and perfumes from the face drifted downward to mix with sweat caught beneath the collar, creating a moist, warm environment perfect for infection. The rough edges of the embroidery left tiny cuts. Metal links pinched the skin. The neck became a map of irritation. Patches darker than others. Areas tender to the slightest pressure. Lines where the collar had dug in too deeply. Yet the collar remained a necessity. Women knew that removing it risked revealing what lay beneath. Uneven patches where hair had been stripped away. Deepening grooves from chemical burns. And discolorations that no powder could mask without cracking. The skin of the neck told the truth far more plainly than the face ever did. It remembered the harm of every mixture applied too generously. Every irritation ignored for the sake of beauty. And so necklaces became shields. Fragile. Decorative barriers between the world and the damage hidden beneath them. Servants noticed. When helping their mistresses dress, they saw the redness lining the throat, the scars forming faint patterns beneath the collar. They watched women wince slightly when a clasp closed too tightly or when a rough seam touched inflamed skin. Some offered gentler fabrics, softer ties, whispered suggestions. But suggestions belonged to a realm where beauty allowed compromise. And Tudor Beauty rarely did. At gatherings, where women held their heads high, the collars contributed to the illusion of strength and elegance. Candlelight caught on jewels, drawing admiration. No one imagined the sting beneath the band or the warmth gathering under layers of fabric. Praise flowed easily. Fine taste. Delicate craftsmanship. Exquisite detail. The more lavish the collar, the more convincing the disguise. But the evening always ended. In the solitude of their rooms, women loosened the ties or unfastened the clasps, lifting the necklace slowly to avoid disturbing the fragile skin beneath. The air that reached their throats felt cool, almost shocking. The collar's imprint remained for minutes, sometimes hours. A red band revealing the exact shape of the ornament that had concealed far more than it displayed. Some women examined the irritation in their mirrors, touching it gently, wondering whether the marks would fade or whether tomorrow's necklace would need to be tied even tighter. Still, the next morning, the ritual began again. The collar was chosen. The damage was covered. The illusion survived another day. Beauty in Tudor life demanded visible perfection, even when the perfection depended on hiding the body's quiet unraveling. The adornments admired in bright halls pressed painfully against tender skin beneath. Beneath each tightly fastened band lay irritation deepening in silence. Every attempt to hide the damage only tightened the hold of the very harm they sought to conceal. Inside Tudor households, beauty often held more authority than hunger. Women learned early that the body existed not as a vessel to sustain life, but as a surface to be disciplined, shaped, and displayed. Meals were arranged around appearance, not nourishment. Portions were small, irregular, and sometimes deliberately skipped. A tightened waistline earned more praise than a stable pulse. A faintness that came from fasting was quietly accepted, even interpreted as delicate femininity, rather than a sign of harm. The day often began without breakfast. Women rose slowly, their muscles stiff from the exhaustion of the previous night. Yet the expectation remained unchanged. The body must present refinement, powder, ceruse, oils, corsets, and collars came before any thought of food. Eating too early risked bloating the stomach or softening the silhouette beneath the gown. Some nibbled on a piece of fruit. Some drank watered wine. But most avoided anything that might change the shape of their waist. By midday, hunger settled into a dull ache. It lived behind the ribs, pulsing gently. Then steadily, women felt it rise when they bent over a mirror. or when a servant tightened the corset's laces to the point where breathing became shallow. The body asked for relief. But relief was impractical. A narrow waist was admired, comfort was not. So the ache continued until it faded into numbness, becoming simply another part of daily life. Dinner, the largest meal of the day, did not always bring rest. Women chose carefully. Tiny pieces of meat, thin slices of bread, broths that offered warmth but little substance. The goal was to maintain control, to show restraint, to remain governed by expectation rather than appetite. If their hands trembled from lack of nutrients, they hid the tremor by folding their fingers tightly. If their thoughts drifted or dulled, they forced themselves to meet the rhythm of conversation. Over time, the consequences emerged in subtle but unmistakable ways. Menstrual cycles stopped. Fatigue settled into the bones, heavy and unrelenting. Hair thinned. Skin paled beyond fashionable whiteness, taking on a lifeless cast. Mood dimmed into a grey quiet, the kind that made the world feel distant, as though life were happening 2 steps away from where they stood. Some women cried without knowing why, others stopped crying entirely. Yet the routines continued. To rest was to risk appearing weak. To eat more was to risk altering the silhouette that society admired. To question the practice was to admit doubt in a culture that valued certainty in beauty above the uncertainty of health. And so women pushed forward, encouraged by the same voices that praised their corsets, their powdered faces, their thin arms, their stillness. In private chambers, the toll became difficult to ignore. Servants noticed when their mistresses fainted mid-conversation or when they needed assistance climbing stairs. Some brought food quietly, offering it as though it were a secret act of kindness. But these gestures were temporary. Women knew that accepting them too often would change the shape of the body they worked so hard to maintain. Evenings were the hardest. As gowns were loosened and corsets untied, the body felt suddenly fragile, as though it might crumble without the structure that held it together. The stomach struggled to process the small amounts it had been given. Muscles cramped beneath the ribs. Hearts raced unexpectedly. Women sat at their mirrors, breath shallow, hands pressed over their midsections, waiting for their pulse to settle. Still, the next morning, the cycle began again. Beauty rituals resumed. Meals shrank back to near nothing. The body, tired and nutrient-starved, prepared to endure another day of expectations built on appearance rather than survival. In Tudor life, outward refinement mattered more than inward stability. The world praised the silhouette, not the spirit that struggled beneath it. Their pursuit of an untouched silhouette hollowed the body long before the eyes recognized the cost. Beneath tightened waists and fading strength, something essential slipped quietly out of reach. What happened to a woman when the reflection she served demanded more than she could survive? Hours in front of a dim mirror could stretch into something shapeless, something that no longer resembled a day. Women sat beneath the weight of powders, pigments, wigs, and oils until time itself thinned around them. Morning drifted into noon. Noon slid into dusk, and yet the work of becoming beautiful felt endless. A quiet labor performed in silence and expectation. What was meant to refine a face often consumed an entire life. Every gesture came slowly by the end, a brush lifted without strength, a compact held with fingers that could barely curl, a ribbon tied by hands, trembling from lack of sleep. These routines were repeated day after day until they hardened into something closer to duty than choice. Even young women found their bodies sinking into exhaustion far earlier than they understood, their reflections demanding attention long after their minds begged for rest. In many households, the ritual began before sunrise. Servants stirred embers to warm the rooms while their mistresses sat motionless, eyes half open, waiting for hands to prepare them. Layer upon layer was applied until the skin could no longer feel air. The weight pressed down on the bones beneath it, a silent pressure that created a dull ache behind the jaw and temples. As each hour passed, the women became less aware of themselves and more aware of the image they were expected to inhabit. Sleep became something that drifted further away with each passing week. The late nights spent maintaining wigs, sorting powders, planning outfits, and removing layers of paint left the mind fogged and heavy the next morning. Some drifted in and out of consciousness during meals, unable to remember what they had eaten. Others found themselves speaking slowly, as though the tongue had forgotten how to move. The body adapted to the deprivation, but not kindly. There was also a hollow quiet that followed them. When a woman spent so much time managing her appearance, she often stopped noticing what existed beneath it. Hunger became routine. Fatigue became a familiar companion. The sense of being someone with desires or thoughts softened until it nearly disappeared. In the mirror, she saw a painted version of herself, but inside, she felt almost absent, as though the ritual had carved away something vital. Even the air in the rooms contributed to the decline. Powders floated into the lungs, oils clung to the throat, and candle smoke mixed with perfume until breathing felt heavy. The women rarely spoke of it. They accepted the dizziness that came after hours bent over a small table. They accepted the trembling that followed long nights of preparation. They accepted the way the heart sometimes raced for no reason at all. By the end of each day, many were unable to rest properly. Not because they were not tired, but because the face they had crafted could not be disturbed. Some slept sitting upright to preserve the layers they would need the next morning again. Others woke in the night when their wigs slipped or their powder smudged. Even in sleep, beauty demanded obedience. Over time, the exhaustion did not simply settle into the body, it reshaped it. Shoulders rounded from long hours leaning toward a mirror, spines curved beneath the weight of wigs and tight garments, eyes dulled, not from age, but from relentless repetition. It was common to see women whose expressions remained fixed, as though the muscles had forgotten how to soften. In conversation, they appeared present, yet something in their gaze suggested they were drifting far away. Many described feeling as though they were watching themselves from the outside, observing a figure that moved, bowed, smiled, and posed without direction from within. They became performers in their own homes, maintaining an appearance of vitality while their bodies sank further into depletion. It was a quiet unraveling, no sudden collapse, just a gradual fading of strength and self until almost nothing remained. From a distance, the polished surface seemed radiant. Up close, however, the fatigue clung to every movement. A woman adjusted her collar, and her hand shook. She bent to lift a small box and nearly lost her balance. She walked through a corridor and forgot where she had intended to go. These were the signs that the pursuit of beauty had rewritten the rhythms of her body entirely. What remained was a figure that looked composed but moved without energy. A body wrapped carefully in silk and pigment, animated more by habit than by desire. The courts praised these women as refined, disciplined, and elegant. Yet behind closed doors, they often sat still for long stretches of time, unable to muster the strength to stand. Beauty was not simply painted onto them, it was extracted from them. Their hours vanished beneath powder and silence until they could no longer recall who they had been before the ritual consumed them. The routines tightened around their lives with each passing season, leaving less of the person within the frame. How far could a body bend beneath beauty's weight before it ceased to be a living thing at all? There were households where the echoes of old beauty rituals lingered long after the women who practiced them had vanished from the halls. Daughters sat where their mothers once sat, studying the same polished mirrors, touching the same jars, repeating motions they did not fully understand. The weight of expectation passed gently at first. like a folded garment placed upon young shoulders. But it grew heavier with every year they lived beneath its presence. In the Tudor years, the routines were shaped by courtly demands and the hunger for a flawless appearance. By the time the early Stuart era arrived, the rituals had softened only in name, not in consequence. The tools looked different. The powders carried new scents. The garments followed new fashions. Yet the underlying message remained the same. A woman's worth flickered brightest when her body bowed beneath the pressure to appear untouched, unmoving, unchanging. Young girls grew up watching their mothers endure the daily constructions of beauty. They saw the long mornings spent applying layers to skin already thinned from years of harsh treatments. They saw the stiff movements caused by tight stays, the careful steps taken to avoid collapsing under heavy gowns, the dimming of the eyes as fatigue quietly carved space around the mind. Even without words, these girls learned what society asked of them. They understood that a woman must suffer quietly to belong. By adolescence, many had already begun small rituals of their own. A dab of powder that made their cheeks pale, a pinch to the skin that left a brief redness, a copied hairstyle that strained the scalp. These gestures, seemingly harmless, were rehearsals for the deeper sacrifices expected in adulthood. They believed the discomfort meant they were growing into the roles laid out for them, following the path their mothers had walked without hesitation. Inside some homes, the older women carried the consequences of decades of beauty practices. Unsteady hands, thinning hair, joints that ached through winter, scars hidden beneath collars and sleeves. The daughters witnessed these signs not as warnings, but as part of womanhood's normal shape. They accepted the trembling fingers that struggled to tie ribbons. They accepted the shallow breaths muffled beneath garments. They accepted the shadowed look in the eyes of those who had lived too long behind painted masks. The inheritance passed on was not found in heirloom boxes or embroidered fabrics. It was in the way a young woman learned to ignore hunger to maintain a figure she was told would bring admiration. It was in the way she rested only after completing the ritual, even if her bones ached. It was in the way she swallowed fear when her skin reacted violently to a new treatment. Too ashamed to admit the cost of her pursuit, these patterns survived because they were woven into daily life, quiet enough to escape questioning. Over generations, the body kept the memory of what society asked from women. The weakened immune systems, the fragile bones, the scars from burns or infections. All of it lingered. These physical traces shaped families as surely as bloodlines. A mother who struggled with chronic fatigue often raised a daughter who learned to work through exhaustion as if it were no burden at all. A grandmother who had damaged her skin with ceruse left behind a lineage of women wary of sunlight, forever chasing unnatural fairness. There was a deeper consequence, too, one that lived in the mind. When beauty demands obedience, selfhood erodes slowly. The girls who grew into women did not see themselves as people with boundaries or rest or needs. They saw themselves as surfaces to be tended. Their value lay in how convincingly they could present the image expected of them. And so, they passed this belief to their daughters, not intentionally, but through every gesture of self-denial they performed without complaint. By the time new generations reached adulthood, the cycle had become almost invisible. No one stopped to question why skin should be pale, why waistlines should be small, why fatigue was normal, and why pain was ignored. The rituals persisted because they had fused into identity. A woman who refused them often felt as though she was stepping outside the world entirely. To be admired required conformity, and conformity required sacrifice. The most haunting aspect of this inheritance was how quietly it endured. Long after the Tudor courts dissolved into history, descendants still carried traces of what earlier women endured: fragile health, weakened posture, persistent fatigue, a quiet dread of failing to meet expectations. The body remembered, even when memory did not. The past clung to the present, through patterns repeated without thought, shaping entire generations, with the weight of a legacy no one had chosen freely. The lessons women absorbed lingered far beyond the era that created them, settling into gestures and beliefs that shaped each new life. The rituals woven through families tightened their hold with every generation that practiced them without question. What remained was a shadow of beauty that stretched forward, touching those who never knew its origins. There is a particular stillness that settles over the image of a Tudor woman when the candles have burned low, and the corridors fall silent. In that dim light, the layers she wore, powders, oils, pigments, fabrics, seemed to loosen their grip on her body, revealing hints of what lay beneath the carefully assembled facade. It becomes clearer then, in this half-darkness, that the grandeur admired by the court was supported by a body quietly collapsing under the weight of expectation. The famous white complexion, so coveted and so praised, offered no protection from the truth. Beneath the pale powders were veins burdened by toxins absorbed over the years. Skin that appeared flawless in the ballroom bore the scars of burns, rashes, and infections. The fragile surface so admired by others could not hide the small tremors in her hands or the exhaustion that deepened across her ribs with every breath. The whiteness was a costume, not a condition of health, and the mask cracked long before anyone dared to look closely. Those who admired Tudor beauty often saw only the final result, a moment captured in candlelight, a face painted to perfection, a body cinched into an ideal shape. They did not witness the long hours spent forcing the body to obey, powders pressed into irritated skin, corsets tightened past the point of dizziness, lips glossed with substances that left the mouth stinging for days. Every part of the appearance required effort, maintenance, and sacrifice. The suffering was absorbed into routine until it no longer felt like suffering. It became simply what a woman must do. Inside the body, the consequences grew quietly. The lungs struggled against restrictive garments. The stomach twisted beneath the pressure of stays. The skin, unable to breathe under constant layers, grew weaker each year. Bones thinned from lack of sunlight. Blood carried traces of lead, mercury, and other substances meant to create beauty, but instead dissolved it from within. Many women lived with symptoms they could not name: fatigue, trembling, numbness, pain, accepting them as the natural cost of belonging to a world that demanded visual perfection at any price. The courts admired the elegance of these women, but elegance was bought with hours of discomfort. Their smiles were painted, but the paint burned. Their cheeks glowed, but the glow came from irritation. Their hair shone beneath elaborate wigs, but the wigs hid bald patches, sores, and infections. Each gesture, each turn of the head, each moment of stillness was a performance maintained, despite the steady decline happening beneath the adornments. The tragedy lay not only in the suffering itself, but in how invisible it became. Women continued the rituals because they believed they had no choice. A bare face might be interpreted as neglect. A natural complexion might be seen as a weakness. Any deviation from the standard risked judgment, social exclusion, or suspicion. The body was never entirely their own. It belonged to the expectations of families, courts, and traditions that valued appearance more than well-being. Even those who understood the dangers felt unable to stop. Once trapped within the image of beauty, there was no easy escape. Removing a layer of powder might reveal scars. Loosening a corset might expose weight changes. Stepping into sunlight might expose the uneven tone of untreated skin. The rituals continued because they were shields as much as prisons. They hid the consequences they created. In the quiet hours after festivities ended, when the paint smudged and the clothing loosened, the body finally spoke. Muscles ached from forced posture. Skin pulsed beneath layers of residue. Hair fell onto the floor in thin strands. The face beneath the cosmetics looked older, strained, emptied of colour. These moments, unseen by guests and courtiers, revealed the true cost of beauty, the slow unravelling of a body pushed far past its limits. No amount of powder could conceal the fatigue that settled in the bones. No layer of pigment could mask the brittleness of hair or teeth weakened by years of harmful treatments. No careful shaping of the silhouette could restore the breath that had been restricted daily. The beauty admired in portraits and poems was, in reality, a brief illusion sustained by constant sacrifice. In a sense, Tudor beauty became a quiet ritual of erosion. The skin eroded, the hair eroded, the body eroded. Even the sense of self eroded as women surrendered more of their comfort, health, and freedom to maintain an image that others valued more than they did. It was not simply vanity, it was survival within a world that measured worth through appearance rather than strength or wellness. What remained beneath the surface was a life lived under strain. Women endured because endurance was expected. They learned to move through discomfort with composure. They learned to hide weakness behind stillness. They learned to silence their own bodies in service of an ideal that promised admiration but delivered illness. The white powder that looked so smooth in candlelight cracked under the slightest pressure. It was a fitting symbol. Beauty that shattered easily, held together only through effort, crumbling slowly over time. No matter how carefully it was applied, the powder could not protect the weakening flesh beneath. The body carried the truth even when the face did not. And so, behind every image of Tudor elegance, there lived a quieter story, a woman whose breath came too shallow, whose bones ached, whose skin burned, whose heart bore the strain of expectations she could never fully meet. She walked through hallways with practiced grace, hiding the tremors in her hands. She danced until her ribs throbbed under tight stays. She smiled despite the stinging on her lips. Her suffering remained unseen, yet it shaped every step she took. This hidden story, repeated across thousands of lives, is what lingers now. The beauty admired from a distance was built upon fragile foundations. The luster of the era fades when viewed closely, replaced by an understanding of the toll it demanded. These women did not simply follow fashion, they sacrificed their health, their comfort, even their years, in pursuit of a standard that gave them little in return. Beneath every luminous face lay a weary body, carrying more strain than the world ever guessed. Behind every admired silhouette stood a woman trying to hold herself together through pain she could not name. And within every breath she drew, the cost of her beauty tightened its hold a little more. Thank you for staying through this quiet walk into the unseen corners of Tudor beauty. May your night be gentle, your breath steady, and your rest untouched by the weight of old expectations. Sleep well, and let the world loosen its grip from your shoulders.